So as we get closer and closer to Slammiversary in July for Impact Wrestling, of course, the conversation still centers around which WWE superstars, which former WWE superstars, which talents that were released back in April by WWE are going to show up at Slammiversary. Is this going to be some first-time ever debuts for Impact Wrestling? Is this going to be some former Impact Wrestling stars returning to the company? Well, we have some updated information when it comes to Impact Wrestling's process on reaching out to some of these released WWE talents, and it looks like Impact Wrestling has already made moves to reach out and possibly sign some of these talents that were released by WWE back in April. Now, this is coming from a report from Fightful Select, which of course is Fightful's Patreon service, so be sure to check that out. They do a very good job. A lot of exclusive information, a lot of new information, a lot of first information, and most importantly, when it comes to all of this kind of reporting, a lot of accurate information. Fightful are very, very good at what they do. So Fightful have released a report saying, quotes, Fightful have learned that Impact Wrestling has already reached out to multiple WWE releases from this past April, though we haven't confirmed whether or not they have firm contracts or deals in place. Now, it's worth mentioning here that last year, Impact Wrestling also reached out to the Good Brothers within 15 minutes of their releases, and Brian Myers within a week of his release. So you could look at that and you could say, well, that's Impact Wrestling being very pragmatic and very proactive when it comes to this, but it was successful for Impact Wrestling last year. Why wouldn't they repeat the same thing they did last year when it comes to these WWE releases? The very moment that any of these releases happened in April, and it was to the day that the same releases happened last year, Impact Wrestling immediately picked up the phone and said, right, where do you want to go? And it's smart for several reasons, most of all because if you're first in this situation, if you're first in reaching out to these talents, then they know they've already got that offer, and it kind of, some talents appreciate that. You can't tell me last year when the Good Brothers got released, I'm sure they got phone calls from multiple companies. I don't know if they got an offer from AEW. I don't know if they got it from New Japan, but they're working with AEW right now. They have deals in their Impact Wrestling contracts that allow them to work with New Japan. And I think if Impact Wrestling had waited, if Impact Wrestling had done a bit of a grace period, if you will, and hadn't reached out or anything like that, I'm not sure that Kyle Anderson and Doc Gallows are in Impact Wrestling today. I think it's that proactive, pragmatic approach by Impact Wrestling that led to the success of these Impact Wrestling stars, but these former WWE stars coming in last year. And I think Impact Wrestling looked at it and said, look, last year for Slammiversary last year was Impact Wrestling's most successful pay-per-view of the year. It did the best buy rates. It did the best numbers in terms of social media. It trended worldwide, which for Impact Wrestling ain't easy to do in this current landscape. It trended worldwide, trended in the United States. And that was all down to the promotion that went into it. That was all down to the discussion points of which of these former WWE stars would show up. Impact Wrestling did a tremendous job, a really good job in promoting, in teasing all of these talents that could be returning to Impact or could be debuting with Impact. That included the likes of EC3 that showed up, the Good Brothers that showed up, Eric Young who showed up, Heath who made his Impact debut. All of these talents, Brian Myers then came in the following set of Impact Wrestling TV tapings. Impact Wrestling, if anything, with their teases, I know they teased the likes of Drake Maverick and some other names, but to be honest, with a lot of names that they teased last year, they were pretty transparent. Now, they did throw in a couple of red herrings. They did do a Super Eric tease at points on Impact last year, and they did tease the Aces and Eights, which I covered extensively and didn't necessarily get right last year, but I guess that's part of the game by Impact Wrestling, but it worked. It worked last year. Slammiversary was a success. Slammiversary was more successful and had more buzz and had a better buy rate and social media metrics than Bound for Glory did. Bound for Glory traditionally is Impact Wrestling's biggest pay-per-view of the year. That's their WrestleMania. That's their Starrcade. That wasn't the case last year. Slammiversary, in the middle of a pandemic where people are cutting costs and people are saving pennies in their pockets, decided to shell out and go for Slammiversary pay-per-view because of the buzz around it, because of the surprise and the wonder of which WWE names are going to show up in Impact Wrestling. That was a success last year, and you could say that Impact Wrestling are sharks in the water, and they smelt blood when it came to the releases this year. And you could say, well, shouldn't they wait and shouldn't they be respectful and all that kind of stuff? I understand some people saying that. It's the same vein that when people get released And they say about wrestling journalists, you should wait before reaching out in terms of interviews because it's a difficult situation. At the end of the day, they've just lost their job in a very difficult climate right now, especially last year. And it's still roughly the same at this point. You've lost your job and you're wondering where your next paycheck's going to come from. You're concerned. You're worried about the future. You're trying to figure things out. But it depends how the wrestlers react to it, frankly. Some wrestlers and some performers, when they get released from their WWE contracts, I mean, there's a couple of different outcomes there. I mean, some wrestlers, like I was about to say, if they get released by WWE, they go into action mode straight away. They're going, okay, right, where can I sign next? When's my first date going to be? Which company's interested in me? I'm going to set up a pro wrestling tee store. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to get booked. I'm going to announce my next date tomorrow. I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to do all of those things. Some wrestlers are very pragmatic in that. They're independent contractors at the end of the day. Their company is themselves. They are their own business. So when they are released by WWE, immediately they go into all of this kind of different stuff. And it's smart. It's smart. So Impact Wrestling knows that. They work with a lot of wrestlers that maybe don't have exclusive contracts or people that have been working on the indie scene, and they realize that some of these wrestlers might be thinking straight away, okay, what am I going to do next? Okay, WWE, it's in the past. I can mourn it at a later date, but I want to figure out what I'm going to do next. So they reach out straight away. That's smart. Some wrestlers as well, they don't necessarily like to think about it, and they don't like to do interviews straight away, and they like to take their time and all that kind of stuff. I would assume that they just wouldn't respond to Impact Wrestling's phone call, or they wouldn't respond to the message, or they wouldn't respond to the text message, or whatever. So I don't necessarily see a problem. I don't see a problem in Impact Wrestling reaching out that quickly. I think it's smart by Impact Wrestling. I think it's probably the wiser thing to do. I don't know if AEW are reaching out that quickly. I don't know if MLW or Ring of Honor reach out that quickly. I don't know. The big story here is that Impact Wrestling have reportedly reached out to these WWE releases already. And it could have happened, and it could have been the day or the moment that they got released, they got a phone call from Impact Wrestling 10, 15 minutes later. It could have been just that quickly. I think what it does say, and whilst we don't know the names, so we don't know whether that's the Iconics, we don't know whether that's Samoa Joe, we don't know whether that's Kalisto or Mickie James or Tucker or anyone like that. We don't know which these names are. We don't know if it's Steve Cutler. We don't know if it's Wesley Blake. We don't know which names Impact Wrestling have reached out to right now. I think one thing that we do know, though, and we kind of knew this already, frankly, but it confirms it, is that at Slammiversary, we will be seeing new names show up onto this Impact Wrestling roster. We will see either former Impact Wrestling stars return in the likes of Samoa Joe and Mickie James, or we will see people show up in Impact Wrestling for the first time, whether that's the Iconics, whether that's, as I mentioned, Kalisto, or former Impact Wrestling stars like Chelsea Green. We know that we're going to get at least one, and that's what I've been saying. Whenever I discuss this topic here on the channel, I've been saying that we know we're going to get at least one. And to be honest, if we didn't, this is why we know we're going to get at least one, because if we didn't, the promotion for this year's Slammiversary is the same as the promotion last year, in that all of these Slammiversary teasers so far are teasing these former names returning or these new names possibly showing up. If Impact Wrestling doesn't deliver on at least one of those names, that's false advertising, and fans would be in uproar because they would have purchased the pay-per-view, they would have purchased the event and not got what was advertised. They wouldn't have got what they bought. They'd be furious. So we know we're going to get at least one name. I think the best way to look at this is look at history. Look at what happened last year. Look at the names that were teased and realize, actually, Impact Wrestling delivered on the majority of those names. So does this mean that Samoa Joe and Chelsea Green and the Iconics and Mickie James and Okada and Naito and all of these kind of names, Daniel Bryan, does it mean all of them are going to show up? No, of course it doesn't. I think there are names that are obviously just thrown in there for the sake of being thrown in there, whether they are Daniel Bryan. I don't think Daniel Bryan's going to Impact Wrestling. Whether it's Okada and Naito, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. I really don't. I think the travel's a bit of an issue there. Maybe things change between now and July. I don't know. But I think names like the Iconics, I think names like even Samoa Joe's are a possibility. So we know talents are going to be showing up. It's just a case of which ones. And as I mentioned before, as we get closer and closer to Slammiversary, we're obviously going to have a better image of which talents they are. If I had to predict now, like I said, for me, the easiest ones to say I think that are most likely to show up are Chelsea Green and the Iconics. I'm not going to rule out Samoa Joe, even though I do think he's more likely to go to AEW. But for a one-off appearance to throw people off the scent that he could go to AEW, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. But certainly fascinating to know that Impact Wrestling already has reached out to some of these talents. So it pretty much confirms what we all speculated. We're going to see at least one name show up in Impact Wrestling at Slammiversary, which is exciting. A couple of things I did want to talk about before we wrap things up here is the commentary change this past week we saw on Impact Wrestling. Josh Matthews returned to commentary this past week on Impact Wrestling on Access TV. Now, of course, this is the first appearance by Josh Matthews at the Impact Wrestling announce desk since he left back in January. He was promoted to the role of senior producer with Impact Wrestling back in January. Matt Striker and D'Lo Brown then took over for him and Madison Rayne in terms of commentary duties with Impact Wrestling. But now, PW Insider is reporting that Matt Striker will be missing several episodes going forward on Access TV for Impact Wrestling. Matthews and D'Lo Brown will call the action, just like they did this week, until Matt Striker can return. Now, it was still noted that you shouldn't worry. Matt Striker is still with Impact Wrestling, but he's taken some time off to handle some outside commitments. There's no word yet on when he will be back. I would hope and assume it would probably be for the next set of Impact Wrestling television tapings. The only thing that you could say is that Impact Wrestling doesn't actually record the voiceover or the commentary at the tapings. They do them after the fact. They post-produce them, I assume, in the Nashville offices. So if that's the case, then whilst maybe Josh Matthews and D'Lo Brown have maybe done, say, the next 2 weeks worth of Impact Wrestling, in a couple of weeks' time, we could see Matt Striker return. So only time will tell. Josh Matthews is so divisive. I mean, he's so divisive, and I think he thrives off that, frankly. He loves it. He loves being that divisive. That's just who Josh Matthews is. He's not everyone's cup of tea as a person, but certainly as a commentator as well. I don't mind him. Is he my favorite commentator of all time? No. Do I think that the commentary team of Matt Striker and D'Lo Brown is an improvement on Josh Matthews and Madison Rayne? Yes, I do. I think Matt Striker does a tremendous job. I think D'Lo Brown is gradually easing into the role. I think initially he was trying to figure it out slightly, but I think he's easing into that role nicely. Ideally, I would have the commentary team we had for the main events of Rebellion every single week in Impact Wrestling. That would be Mauro Ranallo, Matt Striker, and D'Lo Brown. I'm not crazy on the 3-person booth. To be honest, I do prefer the more traditional 2-person booth. But in terms of that commentary team, I felt that really worked for Impact Rebellion. Just having Mauro Ranallo on board for any company, even if it's not even pro wrestling, whether it's MMA, boxing, whatever, for me, you don't get any better right now out there in the world than Mauro Ranallo. Mauro Ranallo is the best play-by-play wrestling man in the world. He's one of the best boxing play-by-play guys, one of the best MMA play-by-play guys. I don't profess to be an expert in boxing or MMA at all, but in the world of pro wrestling, I'm a big Mauro Ranallo guy. Again, I know that Mauro Ranallo isn't everyone's cup of tea. I know people think he's over the top and they don't really like his pop culture references and all that kind of stuff. But just the difference he makes to the product is evidence when he's there and when he's not there. The biggest example of that is NXT. NXT, if you watch an NXT takeover now, they're still great. NXT takeovers, I think, always will be great. They're very, very good. But having Mauro Ranallo and be involved in there for a period of time and now no longer be involved in these NXT takeover specials, I can't really put my finger on it. It's quite intangible, but it just doesn't feel or have the same, I don't even know what the right word is, gravitas, or just, it doesn't just have that energy of sometimes feeling big. And that's a credit to Mauro Ranallo. It really is a credit to Mauro Ranallo that he has that ability just to make something feel big and epic and like a big time title fight. And maybe that's because of his credibility and coming from the boxing background and the MMA background of he's been there. He's called major title fights. He's called some of the biggest fights in recent boxing history and some massive MMA fights during his career as well. He worked for Showtime Boxing, and maybe it's because of that credibility that he has that when he does these big matches in the world of pro wrestling, whether it's on NXT TakeOver, whether it's for Impact Wrestling, he called obviously the historic AEW World Championship versus Impact World Championship main event at Impact Rebellion, or even for WWE when he's calling John Cena's 16th WWE World Heavyweight Championship victory, or Randy Orton versus Brock Lesnar at SummerSlam 2016. Whether he's calling all of those matches, he has this just ability to make something feel big and make it feel epic and make it feel like you're witnessing history. And not many people can do that. Not many people can do that. And for me, that's why he is the best play-by-play guy out there in the world right now. So, I mean, if Impact Wrestling could work out a deal that, I mean, we had Mauro Ranallo come to Impact in April for that Rebellion event. If they could work out a deal where he does that, I mean, even for pay-per-views, even 4 times a year for pay-per-views would be a big deal. Personally, like I said, I'm a Mauro Ranallo guy, so I would I would love it to be every single week on Impact and Access TV. I don't know how feasible that is. Only time will tell. But look, that's not off the table. That's not out of the realm of possibility. When they agreed the deal with Mauro Ranallo earlier this year, they spoke openly about that Mauro Ranallo and Scott D'Amore have a great relationship together. They go back years and years as Canadians, of course. And if Impact Wrestling over the course of the last couple of years or so, their real big developments and progressions have all been about relationships that were pre-existing before Impact Wrestling, whether that's Don Callis and Kenny Omega working that deal and kind of factoring that into to AEW and Impact Wrestling's working relationship, or prior to that, Impact Wrestling coming very close to getting Chris Jericho in or Kenny Omega in prior to AEW. That's all because of existing relationships, and sometimes that's what you've got to do. That's what pro wrestling has been built on, is existing relationships before you get into somewhere. So I wouldn't rule out a Mauro Ranallo coming into Impact Wrestling. I think that it's going to be fascinating to see when it comes to AEW. Speaking of commentary teams, that obviously AEW Rampage debuts in August, what that commentary team is going to look like. Personally, again, if I'm AEW, I give a phone call to Mauro Ranallo or Tom Phillips for that matter and say, look, we've got this new show. Do you want to work on TNT and then TBS next year? That's a big opportunity. But as far as Josh Matthews, like I mentioned, look, I know some people just genuinely can't stand him and can't listen to him, and I'm a big football fan, soccer fan, and I've got those commentators that I'm a bit like that when I watch my football. That sometimes I just go, you know what, I can't listen to this person, I can't stand them. They're just they drive me insane, and it really does take you out of it. And to be honest, you have to remember that a good commentator just enhances the viewing experience, right? The phrase that Jim Ross uses is that the wrestlers write the music and Jim Ross delivers the lyrics, that kind of stuff. And sometimes if you've got a bad commentator, or not necessarily even just a bad one, but an annoying one, an obnoxious one, it can take you right out of it. And pro wrestling is suspension of disbelief. And when you're taking out of that suspension of disbelief, it's really hard to get back into it. Once you're fully emotionally invested, and once you've bought in, if you will, and that you're in that suspension of disbelief, that's when magic happens in the world of pro wrestling. So that's how important a commentator is. But it looks like it's not going to be a permanent thing or anything like that. Matt Striker's still with the company. He's just going to be away from doing voiceovers for the next few weeks. And Josh Matthews coming in for a couple of weeks, I guess it's fine. I guess people will just be having flashbacks going, oh no, we only had him away for 5 months and he's already back. As far as I'm aware, Josh Matthews is very happy doing what he's doing, being a senior producer, working on the website side of things. He does Before the Impact as well. So I think he's very happy doing what he's doing. And look, we can only hope that Matt Striker can be back soon, because I'm a big fan of Matt Striker. I think he does an excellent job. As I mentioned, I think he's probably better as a color commentator, as an analyst, but I think he does well in the play-by-play role as well. He's done it for AAA, he did it for Lucha Underground, so he's transitioned nicely into that role over the course of the last few years, and I think Matt Striker and D'Lo Brown have excellent chemistry. I really do. I think since they came in at Hard to Kill, they've done an excellent job this year, so hopefully we get Matt Striker back soon. And finally, I wanted to touch on some comments by Josh Alexander, because I was watching I was watching AEW rather last night, and I saw Ethan Page. He was tag teaming with Scorpio Sky, obviously before their match against Sting and Darby Allin this coming weekend, and there was lots of discussions. Lots of thoughts I was thinking about Josh Alexander and Ethan Page in the North and all that kind of stuff. And there's a recent interview Josh Alexander did with Wrestling Epicenter. And he was asked about Ethan Page's departure from Impact Wrestling and signing with AEW. And Alexander and Page, of course, they teamed together as the North for almost a decade prior to coming into Impact Wrestling, won numerous tag team titles, longest reigning Impact tag team champions in the promotion's history, 2-time Impact tag team champions. And Josh Alexander was asked if he was nervous about his partner leaving the company, whilst obviously Alexander was staying because he still has a contract until 2022. This is what Alexander had to say, quote, yeah, but it was only scary in the sense that opportunities don't always come along in professional wrestling, so there is always the uncertainty of them not knowing who is going to make the decisions and when to get an opportunity. I just had to wait my turn. Luckily, it came very quickly and I was able to show what I could do, but initially going into Hard to Kill, I had a pre-show match with Brian Myers. I didn't know if someone from management was watching and say that Josh has something, but that's what it's all about, getting an opportunity and trying to hit a home run every single time. So I think it's interesting to say that he was nervous and he didn't know where it was going to be headed. For me, Josh Alexander, I mean, he's the X Division champion right now, and He's one of the hottest acts in Impact Wrestling. I mean, I did a video recently, didn't I, talking about names that potentially could beat Kenny Omega for the Impact World Championship, and Josh Alexander was right up there because he's that talented. He's got a 60-minute Iron Man match next week against TJP that everyone's raving about that was there at the tapings. That's because of his talent, and I think he's an excellent representation for the X Division, that it's a hybrid style, and it's a different kind of style, and look, we don't know what the future holds for Josh Alexander in 2022. Will he stay? Won't he stay? He's kind of been a bit indifferent on it. He said that obviously people expect him to go to AEW. People expect him to team up with Ethan Page and be the North in AEW. AEW has arguably the best tag team division in the world, and the North would certainly be right at the top of that list if they went there anyway. They're that good. But also Josh Alexander has said, look, I mean, I'm happy to stay with Impact if they make me a good offer. And look, if he's involved in main events, if he's involved in possibly being a world champion, then that's a compelling reason to stay with Impact Wrestling. So I wouldn't rule out him staying with Impact in the future. And frankly, you know, Ethan Page has got a huge opportunity this coming weekend. He's going to be in the same ring with Sting. I mean, that's huge. But the tag team that he has with Scorpio Sky is nowhere near the North. Nowhere near the North. And I find it quite ironic that he left Impact and goes into another tag team in AEW, which is, for me, an inferior tag team. So that feels a bit odd to me, and it feels a bit forced. I have no doubt their match on Sunday will be excellent, but it's nowhere near the North, and I'm surprised that Ethan Page would agree to that, considering he was very particular on how the North wouldn't break up in Impact Wrestling. He goes to AEW, then gets put in a random tag team with Scorpio Sky. It just feels very strange, doesn't it? But again, it's nowhere near, absolutely nowhere near the North. But maybe we will see them team up in AEW in the future. I'm sure at some point we'll see the North team up. It's just a case of how soon it happens, if Josh Alexander decides to stay with Impact Wrestling or not. As of right now, like I said, I think he's doing great things as a single star, and I think he's probably getting the bug to stick as a single star in Impact Wrestling. So who knows what could happen in the future. But look, guys, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of the Impact Wrestling news stories we've spoken about today? Impact Wrestling reaching out to WWE talent, the recent Impact Wrestling commentary changes, and Josh Alexander discussing Ethan Page's move to AEW. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, AEW, WWE, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube, get up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right corner up the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.